Welcome back to Justice Under Review. We know you've been waiting, so without further ado, let's dive right into today's story. The courtroom of Judge Eleanor Hayes was her empire. She was judge, jury, and often executioner, especially for those she deemed unworthy. When Nathan Brooks, a black man in a slightly rumpled suit, stood before her for a simple traffic warrant, she saw only what her prejudice allowed: another criminal. She decided to make an example of him. She refused to listen. She sentenced him to time in jail for contempt. But what Judge Hayes didn't know was that the man she was trying to imprison was not just an innocent citizen. He was the most powerful lawyer in the city and her new boss. Courtroom 3B of the Brooklyn County Courthouse was not just a room. It was a monument to Judge Eleanor Hayes. The oak walls, darkened by a century of grim pronouncements, were scrubbed and polished weekly. The brass railing separating the gallery from the bar gleamed under the cold fluorescent lights. Even the air felt curated, heavy with the scent of old paper, floor wax, and the metallic tang of absolute, unquestionable authority. And at the center of this universe, perched high on her judicial throne, sat Judge Hayes. In her late 60s, Hayes was a woman forged from old money and brittle ideology. Her silver hair was perpetually locked in a severe bun, and her robes, always impeccably starched, seemed more like armor than attire. In the courthouse hallways, she was known as Eleanor the Merciless, a nickname spoken only in whispers. She believed in order, in breeding, and in the cleansing power of swift, merciless judgment. Her grandfather, Judge Theodore Hayes, had presided over this same bench, and Eleanor saw herself as the righteous heir to a legacy of stamping out the element that she believed was perpetually eroding society. Her morning docket was, in her eyes, a parade of human failings: drunk drivers, petty thieves, sobbing mothers, and defiant young men. She viewed them all with the same icy disdain. "Next case," she droned, not looking up from her papers. Docket number, the People versus Brooks. Her bailiff, a burly, long-suffering man named Frank Gibbons, announced. "Counsel," Hayes's voice snapped like a whip. A young woman with tired eyes and a polyester suit stood up. "Rebecca Thompson, Your Honor, from the Public Defender's Office. My client is here on a bench warrant for a failure to appear on a traffic violation." A failure to appear. Wonderful. Hayes finally looked up, her gaze scanning the courtroom. "Well, where is he? Don't tell me he's failed to appear for his failure to appear." The audacity is almost impressive. "He is here, Your Honor. He was detained at the security checkpoint," Thompson said, her voice tight. Detained at security figures. The side door opened, and Deputy Gibbons led a man to the defendant's table. He was a tall black man, athletic in build. He wore a dark gray suit, expensive but disheveled, as if he had been sleeping in it. His tie was loosened at the collar. He looked focused, his expression a mask of controlled frustration. This was Nathan Brooks. Judge Hayes stared at him. She didn't just look, she inspected. Her eyes took in his dark skin, his short, neat dreadlocks, his rumpled suit. Her lip curled, an almost microscopic movement, but one that Rebecca Thompson, Frank Gibbons, and everyone in the gallery recognized instantly. It was the look, the "here we go" look. Hayes's internal monologue began, a venomous whisper that fueled her judicial persona. "Look at this, the arrogant strutting in here in a fancy suit he probably bought with stolen money, thinking he's above the law. He can't even be bothered to show up for a simple ticket. This is the rot. This is the disrespect I fight every single day." "So," Hayes said, her voice dripping with condescension, "you are Mr. Brooks." Nathan Brooks stood tall. "Yes, Your Honor." There seems to be a significant misunderstanding regarding silence. The word cut through the air. It wasn't a request. It was a command that echoed off the high ceilings. "You do not speak in my courtroom unless I give you permission to speak," Hayes spat. "You are a defendant. You have a lawyer. She will speak for you. And frankly, given your failure to appear, your credibility is already zero." "Miss Thompson, what possible excuse does your client have for wasting this court's time?" Rebecca Thompson gripped her lectern. "Your Honor, Mr. Brooks was not properly served. The original summons was sent to an address he hasn't lived at in years. The ticket itself was for a vehicle he sold long ago. He was here this morning of his own free will to clear up this clerical error when the outstanding warrant, which he was unaware of, was flagged at security." Hayes let out a sound that was almost a laugh. A clerical error. How convenient. The old "it wasn't me" defense. I've heard it 1,000 times. "Your Honor, I have the bill of sale right here," Thompson insisted, waving a paper. Hayes waved her hand dismissively, not even glancing at the document. "I don't care about your paperwork. I care about the fact that a warrant was issued and it was ignored. It shows a fundamental lack of respect for the law." "Your Honor, that is demonstrably false," Nathan said, his voice low and firm. He couldn't help himself. Hayes's eyes flashed with genuine fury. "Did I give you permission to speak, Mr. Brooks? Did I? Or are you, as I suspect, one of those men who believes his own voice is more important than the rules of this institution?" "Eleanor, no," Frank Gibbons whispered under his breath from his desk, so quietly no one could hear. He had been staring at the man. He recognized him from the newspaper, but his brain couldn't make the connection fast enough. He had tried to get the judge's attention before the man was brought out, but she had been in one of her moods. "Your Honor," Nathan tried again, "I am an officer of the court. I was just trying to—" This was the final straw for Hayes, the insolence. "You are not an officer of the court," she thundered, slamming her hand on her desk. "You are a defendant in my courtroom. How dare you impersonate a lawyer? That is a criminal offense in itself. Miss Thompson, control your client, or I will hold you both in contempt." Rebecca Thompson looked at Nathan, her eyes wide with panic. She had no idea what he was talking about, but she knew he had just sealed his fate. "Judge, please," Thompson begged. "My client simply meant—" "I know what he meant," Hayes said, her face a mask of cold rage. "Justice under review. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss our latest stories. He meant to lie. He meant to intimidate. He meant to play games. And I do not play games." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Nathan. "I see you, Mr. Brooks. I see you clearer than you think. You believe you can swagger in here, disrespect my authority, and walk out. You are mistaken." A suffocating silence fell over courtroom 3B. The only sound was the frantic scratching of a pen from the press row, where a young reporter named Ben Carter was scribbling notes so fast his knuckles were white. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Nathan Brooks took a slow, deep breath. He held his hands loosely at his sides. He had faced down murderers in interrogation rooms. He had argued before the Supreme Court. He had never in his entire professional life been treated with such naked, unprocessed contempt. His anger was a cold, hard stone in his stomach. But he knew that showing it would be like throwing gasoline on a fire. "Your Honor," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion, "if you would just look at the file, or allow me to present my identification. The warrant is for a Nathan L. Brooks. My name is Nathan James Brooks. The date of birth is incorrect. He's trying to play lawyer again, Miss Thompson." Hayes's voice was triumphant. She saw this as a confession, a pathetic attempt to wriggle free on a technicality. "Arguing about middle initials. the desperation. "I am not interested in your games, sir." "This isn't a game, Your Honor," Rebecca Thompson pleaded, her voice cracking. "This is a simple case of mistaken identity. He's not even the right person." "Judge, please just read the file." "I have read enough," Hayes declared. She snapped the file shut. "What I have before me is a man who has shown zero respect for this court. He failed to appear. He was detained at security, likely causing a disturbance. He has interrupted me, a sitting judge, twice, and he has falsely claimed to be an officer of the court. He is, in short, in contempt." "Your Honor, no!" Thompson cried out. "Be silent, Miss Thompson, or you will be next." Hayes pointed a long, bony finger at Nathan. "Mr. Brooks, I find your behavior insulting. I find your presence an affront to the dignity of this institution. You need to learn a lesson about respect. You need to understand that the law is not something you can just talk your way out of." She relished this moment. This was why she was here, to bring the arrogant crashing down to earth. "I am finding you in summary contempt of court," she announced, "and for the original warrant, I am setting bail at a high amount." "High amount?" Thompson gasped for a parking ticket. "But that," Hayes continued, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips, "can wait. The contempt charge must be served first. I sentence you, Nathan Brooks, to time in the Brooklyn County Jail, effective immediately." The gallery erupted in gasps. Ben Carter, the reporter, nearly dropped his phone. "Time for this." "Your Honor, this is unconscionable," Thompson yelled, abandoning all pretense of decorum. "You cannot do this. It is a gross abuse of power." "Deputy Gibbons," Hayes roared, pointing at Thompson. "Escort Miss Thompson from my courtroom. She is in contempt as well. Hold her in the back." "And Deputy," Hayes added, her voice dropping to a near whisper as she stared at Nathan. "Take this defendant into custody. I want him processed. I want him in a cell before lunch." Frank Gibbons rose from his chair. His face was pale. He had been a bailiff for years. He had seen Hayes be cruel, but this was a new level. He knew instinctively that something was terribly wrong. He had seen the name Brooks on the internal memo, the one about the new DA, but the memo had said N.J. Brooks. This defendant was Nathan Brooks. He hadn't put it together, and now he was being ordered to jail him. "Your Honor," Gibbons said, his voice trembling slightly. Perhaps we should take a recess just to review the file one more time." "You questioning my order, Deputy?" "No, Your Honor. It's just, I think there might be. I gave you a direct order. Arrest that man." Gibbons swallowed. He put his hand on his service weapon, a reflexive habit, and unclipped the strap on his holster. He looked at Nathan Brooks, who was just watching him, not with fear, not with anger, with pity. Gibbons took one step toward the defendant's table, and at that exact moment, the main doors of courtroom 3B at the far end of the gallery burst open with a crash that shook the very walls. In Judge Hayes's courtroom, no one entered without permission. No one ran. No one shouted. The crashing of the main doors was such a profound violation of her world that for a second she was too stunned to even be angry. All heads snapped to the back. Standing in the doorway, flanked by two stone-faced courthouse marshals, was a man who commanded authority in a way Hayes only pretended to. He was Judge Leonard Hoffman, the presiding judge of the Brooklyn County Superior Court. Hoffman was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 70s, a former Marine whose judicial temperament was famously patient, but whose wrath was legendary. He was, in effect, the only person in the building who was Eleanor Hayes's boss. His eyes scanned the room, his face a mask of thunder. The gallery, which had been murmuring, went dead silent. "Judge Hoffman," Hayes sputtered, rising from her chair. "What is the meaning of this? I am in the middle of a sentencing. This is my courtroom. Judge Hoffman ignored her completely. His gaze was fixed on the scene at the front. Rebecca Thompson being held by the arm by a confused deputy. Frank Gibbons' hand on his gun, frozen between the bench and the defendant, and Nathan Brooks standing calmly at the table. Everyone sit down. Hoffman's voice boomed low and resonant. It wasn't a request. He strode down the central aisle, his hard-soled shoes clicking with sharp, angry precision on the marble floor. He didn't stop at the gallery rail. He unlatched the swinging gate and entered the bar, a space reserved only for counsel and court staff. He walked directly past the prosecution and defense tables, right up to the small podium where Nathan Brooks stood. Hayes watched her mouth agape. "Leonard, what are you doing? That man is a defendant. He is in custody." Hoffman finally turned his head. "Justice under review. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss our latest stories." Pinning Judge Hayes to her chair with a look of such concentrated fury that she physically recoiled. "You," he said to her, his voice quiet, but carrying more menace than her loudest shout, "will be silent." He then turned to Nathan Brooks. The anger melted from his face, replaced by an expression of profound, almost paternal apology. "Mr. Brooks," Judge Hoffman said, extending his hand, "I am so terribly sorry. There was a complete breakdown in communication. Your new ID badge hadn't been activated in the system. The security team at the front gate followed protocol for a warrant, but they were supposed to call my office, not detain you, and send you here." Hayes's brain stalled. "New ID badge? My office? What is he talking about?" "It's quite all right, Judge Hoffman," Nathan said, his voice still pretty naturally calm as he shook the presiding judge's hand. "It's been illuminating. I'll just bet it has." Hoffman turned to the stunned bailiff. "Deputy Gibbons, release Miss Thompson. And for God's sake, man, take your hand off your weapon." Gibbons, blushing crimson, immediately unhooked his thumb and stepped back. "Yes, Judge." Rebecca Thompson stumbled forward, rubbing her arm, looking utterly bewildered. "Judge Hoffman," Hayes tried again, her voice now high and thin, "I don't understand this man. This man has a warrant. He was disrespectful. He lied about being an officer of the court." Judge Hoffman turned his full body to face the bench. He looked up at Eleanor Hayes, his eyes cold. "He didn't lie, Eleanor." Hoffman's voice filled the cavernous room. "This man," he said, gesturing to Nathan, "is Nathan James Brooks. He is a graduate of Yale Law School. He is a former U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. He is the man who successfully prosecuted the entire Petrova organized crime family, a case you taught a seminar on." A collective gasp sucked the air from the gallery. Rebecca Thompson's hand flew to her mouth. Ben Carter, the reporter, was already texting his editor. Holy Hayes' face went from pink to a chalky mottled white. Her eyes darted from Hoffman to Nathan, as if seeing him for the first time. The rumpled suit, the exhaustion. He hadn't been sleeping in his suit because he was homeless. He had been sleeping in it because he'd just gotten off a red-eye flight from D.C. "The warrant," Hoffman continued, his voice like a hammer striking an anvil, was as miss. "Thompson tried to tell you a clerical error for a car he sold long ago. A mistake he was coming here to clear up as a courtesy before his meeting." Hayes was shaking her head, a jerky movement. "Meeting with who?" Judge Hoffman took a small, deliberate step closer to her bench. He looked up at her, his eyes cold. "With me, Eleanor, and the rest of the judiciary." He let the silence hang. "Allow me," Judge Hoffman said, his voice ringing with formal, terrible clarity, "to properly introduce you to your new colleague. Judge Hayes, Meet Chief Prosecutor Nathan Brooks. He was unanimously approved by the governor's commission. As of this morning, he is the head of the district attorney's office for this entire county, the office that argues every single case in your courtroom. The world stopped for Judge Eleanor Hayes, the polished oak, the gleaming brass, the very air of her kingdom suddenly dissolved. The thug, the liar, the defendant she had just sentenced to jail was the new chief prosecutor. He was in the intricate ecosystem of the courthouse, the single most powerful attorney in the building. He controlled the budget, the cases, and the lawyers who would stand before her every day. Her mind, a fortress of supreme confidence just moments before, shattered into 1,000 panicked pieces. No, it's not possible. He's but the face of Judge Hoffman, rigid with anger, and the calm, steady gaze of Nathan Brooks confirmed the impossible. She had just tried to jail her new chief prosecutor. She stammered, her hands gripping the side of her bench. She looked like a drowning woman searching for a piece of wreckage. I did not know. He didn't identify himself. He tried, Your Honor. Rebecca Thompson's voice, no longer pleading, but sharp with vindication, cut through the silence. He told you he was an officer of the court, and you called him a liar. He tried to explain, and you told him to be silent. You wouldn't even look at his paperwork. Miss Thompson is correct, Judge Hoffman affirmed. We have the transcript. He nodded to the court reporter who was pale and staring straight ahead, her fingers frozen on her keys. Hayes looked desperately at Nathan. Mr. Chief Prosecutor Brooks, this is a misunderstanding. A simple error. Nathan Brooks had not moved. He had not smiled. He had not gloated. He simply stood, a pillar of stillness, and watched her implode. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. Your Honor, he said, the title now dripping with a terrible formal irony. I believe you were in the middle of sentencing me for contempt. This simple statement was the final blow. It was the sound of the trap springing. It highlighted the absurd, catastrophic scope of her error. She hadn't just been wrong. She had been tyrannically wrong. She had been so blinded by her own prejudice that she couldn't see the most important legal figure in the county standing right in front of her. Hayes let out a small, strangled sound. Her eyes rolled back slightly, and she stumbled, catching herself on her high-backed chair before sinking into it. She was no longer a judge. She was a small, terrified old woman. Judge Hoffman stepped forward, taking full command. Judge Hayes, he ordered, you will recess this court. Now Hayes fumbled for her gavel, her hand shaking so violently she could barely grasp it. She lifted it, but it was Nathan Brooks she was staring at. Court is recessed, she whispered. She banged the gavel, not with a crack, but with a weak, defeated thud. She didn't walk to her chambers. She fled. She scrambled from her chair and disappeared through the side door, her black robes flapping behind her like the wings of a broken crow. The second the door slammed shut, the courtroom erupted. The gallery buzzed with 100 frantic whispers. Justice under review. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss our latest stories. Ben Carter was already on his feet halfway up the aisle, dialing his editor. Bailiff, Hoffman barked. Clear this courtroom now, everyone out. Gibbons and the other deputies, energized by Hoffman's authority, began herding the stunned onlookers out. Miss Thompson, Hoffman said, his tone softening. Mr. Brooks, please wait in the hallway. I will speak with both of you in a moment. Miss Thompson, you have my profound apologies and my thanks. You showed admirable courage. Rebecca Thompson, still in shock, just nodded. Hoffman turned to the man of the hour. "Mr. Brooks, my chambers, please." In Judge Hoffman's palatial office, a room filled with leather-bound books and portraits of stern-faced men. Hoffman was pacing, his face still red with rage. "A disaster, Nathan," Hoffman said, using his first name. "A complete procedural and ethical catastrophe. I knew Eleanor was traditional. I knew she was a hardliner. I had heard whispers. But this was extreme racism in the open. Nathan Brooks was sitting in a leather armchair, finally sipping a cup of water a clerk had brought him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, familiar exhaustion. "Judge, with all due respect, this isn't about me. I'm fine. I have a title. I have power. I have you." He leaned forward. "This is about the man who was before me and the woman who will be after me. What happens to the people who walk into that courtroom who look like me but aren't the new chief prosecutor? What happened to them? What would have happened to me if you hadn't walked in?" He looked Hoffman in the eye. "She didn't just sentence me to time in jail, Judge. She sentenced a type. She was willing to destroy a man's life, get him fired, and give him a record over a parking ticket because he didn't look the way she thought he should look." Hoffman stopped pacing. He stared at Nathan, the anger on his face hardening into something more resolute. He knew what Nathan was saying was the absolute unvarnished truth. The real crime hadn't been the insult to Nathan Brooks, the new chief. The crime had been against the very concept of justice. "You are correct," Hoffman said. He walked to his desk and picked up the phone. "Get me Helen Rivers at the Commission on Judicial Conduct," he said to his assistant. "Tell her it's an emergency, a code-red emergency." He hung up. "Eleanor Hayes is not just getting a suspension, Nathan. I'm going to make sure she never sits on a bench in this state again. Her reign is over today." The hard karma for Judge Eleanor Hayes was not a single, swift execution. It was a slow, meticulous, and public dismantling. It was death by 1,000 procedural cuts, each one delivered with the cold precision of the law she claimed to uphold. It began that afternoon. Judge Leonard Hoffman had filed a formal complaint with the State Commission on Judicial Conduct, JCC. Judge Hayes was served with a notice of immediate suspension with pay pending a full investigation. She was ordered to surrender her keys, her courthouse ID, and her caseload. She was escorted from the building by the very marshals she used to command. But the real damage had been done by Ben Carter, the reporter. His story, published on the Brooklyn County Chronicle website, was a nuclear explosion. Headline: Judge Hayes sentences new chief prosecutor to jail for a parking ticket. Sources allege pattern of extreme bias. The story was brutal. It had quotes. It had the docket number. It had Rebecca Thompson's statement given from the hallway. I tried to tell her. She wouldn't listen. She called him a liar. She called me a liar. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. The story went national. The cable news networks picked it up. Photos of the stern-faced, silver-haired Hayes were juxtaposed with the strong, professional photos of Nathan Brooks. The narrative was inescapable. Old racist power versus new progressive justice. Hayes, humiliated and terrified, hired a high-priced defense attorney, a notorious shark named Preston Howell. Howell immediately went on the offensive, releasing a statement that Judge Hayes deeply regretted the administrative error, but that she had been dealing with a difficult and disruptive defendant who refused to identify himself. This was a fatal mistake. The very next day, Judge Hoffman, in his capacity as presiding judge, authorized the release of the official court transcript and the security footage from the courtroom. The transcript was damning. "Mr. Brooks, Your Honor, I am an officer of the court. I was just trying to—" "You are not an officer of the court. You are a defendant. How dare you impersonate a lawyer? The video was worse. It didn't have clear audio, but the body language was unmistakable. Hayes's furious, dismissive gestures, Rebecca Thompson's desperate pleading, Nathan Brooks's impossible calm, and finally Hayes's pointing finger as she ordered him to jail. The JCC, facing immense public and political pressure, fast-tracked the hearing. Nathan Brooks, now installed in the Chief Prosecutor's office, was the first witness. He did not come in guns blazing. He was somber, precise, and devastating. It was not his anger that concerned me, he stated under oath. It was his certainty. He didn't check a file. He didn't ask a question. He knew what I was. In his mind, the facts were irrelevant. My failure to appear was not a clerical error. It was a character flaw inherent to my appearance. He saw a black man in a rumpled suit, and his entire judicial process was dictated by that single prejudiced assumption. The next witness was Rebecca Thompson. She came with receipts. We, the public defenders, we call him the merciless or quick herald because that's how long a non-white defendant gets before he makes up his mind. Thompson's testimony, guided by the JCC's counsel, was the true beginning of the end. She presented case files. Case, People v. Rodriguez, a Hispanic man, young, shoplifting a small item. First offense, the standard is probation and community service. Judge Hayes gave him time in county jail. That same afternoon, case, People v. Stewart, a white college student, shoplifting a more expensive item. First offense, Judge Hayes told him to not disappoint his parents again and dismissed the case. She presented such cases, all recent. The pattern was undeniable. The final witness was the bailiff, Frank Gibbons. He was terrified, sweating in his dress uniform. Mr. Gibbons, the JCC counsel asked, did you at any point try to warn Judge Hayes? Justice under review. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss our latest stories. Gibbons looked at Hayes, who was sitting beside her lawyer, looking gray and frail. Yes, sir, Gibbons said, his voice thick. I recognized Mr. Brooks, not right away, but it clicked from the internal memos about the new DA. I tried to approach the bench. He slapped my hand away. He told me to handle the defendant. He has a look. We all know it. When he gets that look, you don't argue. I've seen him ruin careers. Afraid of what, Mr. Gibbons? Of him, he said simply. We all were. The case of Judge Eleanor Hayes, JCC docket, was not a quiet internal review. It was a public spectacle. The hearing room, normally a drab, bureaucratic space, was overflowing. Every seat was taken by reporters, courthouse staff, lawyers, and citizens who had for years whispered about Hayes's cruelty and now came to see the Queen held to account. Eleanor Hayes sat at the respondents' table, a ghost of her former self. The severe bun was gone, replaced by limp, thinning silver hair. She wore a simple gray suit, her hands clasped so tightly on the table that her knuckles were white. Beside her sat Preston Howell, her attorney. He was everything she was not. Vibrant, aggressive, and utterly without shame. He was a notorious shark, a man who specialized in defending the indefensible, and he seemed to relish the challenge. This is not a hearing. It's a witch hunt, he declared in his opening statement, his voice booming. It is a public lynching fueled by a media mob and a woke agenda, all aimed at destroying the career of a woman who has given years of her life to the law. Howell's strategy was one of scorched earth. He did not defend Hayes's actions. He attacked the character of everyone who dared to report them. His cross-examination of Rebecca Thompson was brutal. Miss Thompson, he sneered, isn't it true you're a social justice advocate? Isn't it true you've been disciplined twice for overly zealous advocacy in Judge Hayes's courtroom? Isn't this just your personal vendetta? a way to get back at a judge who simply didn't buy your client's sob stories. Rebecca held her ground. I was disciplined for filing motions to reconsider, Mr. Howell, and I'll file them again every time I see a young person sent to jail for a first offense small theft. His attack on Frank Gibbons, the bailiff, was just as vicious. You were afraid, Howell mocked. You, a sworn deputy with a firearm on your hip, were afraid of an older man. Or isn't it true, Mr. Gibbons, that you simply failed in your duty? That you saw a tense situation, and rather than de-escalate, you panicked. You're blaming him for your own incompetence. Gibbons, sweating in the hot seat, simply shook his head. I wasn't afraid of him. I was afraid of his power. There's a difference. But Howell saved his most potent venom for the man who wasn't there, Nathan Brooks, who had already given his calm, devastating testimony. Mr. Brooks is the new Chief Prosecutor, Howell argued in his closing pacing before the commission. He is by definition the most powerful lawyer in the county. Are we to believe he was a helpless victim? He never said, Judge, I am the new Chief Prosecutor, Nathan Brooks. He played a game. He was coy. He said, I am an officer of the court. A vague, almost tricky phrase. Why? Why would he do that unless he wanted this confrontation? He set a trap. He wanted to make an example of him to clear the way for his new regime. It was a bold, conspiratorial narrative, and it backfired spectacularly. The JCC's lead counsel, Maria Chen, a sharp, precise woman whose quiet demeanor concealed a steel trap of a mind, rose for her rebuttal. She walked to the lectern, not with Howell's theatricality, but with a heavy file in her hands. Mr. Howell's defense is fascinating, she began, her voice calm. He has painted Rebecca Thompson as a radical, Frank Gibbons as a coward, and the most powerful prosecutor in the state as a tricky victim. His entire argument is that the problem isn't Judge Hayes' documented, proven bias, but that her victims were not polite enough in the face of it. He is, to be blunt, blaming the victims of the bias for the bias itself. It is frankly disgusting. She then turned to the file. But Mr. Howell is right about one thing. This case is not just about Nathan Brooks. He was just the man who had the power to turn on the lights. Let's talk about what was happening in the dark. This was the moment she produced the report from Dr. Patel, the statistician. Mr. Howell calls Judge Hayes tough and old school. The data calls him a bigot. She projected the numbers onto a screen. We analyzed years of sentencing data. Judge Hayes' sentencing for non-violent misdemeanor infractions for minority defendants is on average much higher than the district average. That isn't tough. That's a mathematical certainty of prejudice. A low gasp came from the gallery. One of the commissioners, a stern-faced former appellate judge, slowly removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Let's talk about the charge he levied against Mr. Brooks, Chen continued. Contempt of court. A tool meant to preserve the dignity of the room. In Judge Hayes' hands, it was a weapon. His contempt of court charges, the ones he issues from the bench, are levied against non-white individuals at a rate of 9-1. She let the number hang in the air. This is not tough. This is a system of abuse. This is a judge who has run his courtroom as a personal fief, where the color of your skin determines the weight of his gavel. Chen looked directly at the commissioners. The Brooks incident was not an aberration. It was the culmination. It was not a mistake. It was a pattern. The only difference between Nathan Brooks and the hundreds of others who stood before him is that he had a title. He was the one he couldn't break. He was the day he finally got caught. The commission deliberated for agonizingly long. On the final day, the room was silent. Judge Eleanor Hayes was ordered to appear. She walked in, leaning on her lawyer's arm, and stood before the panel. She looked frail, shrunken, her eyes darting nervously around the room she once would have commanded. The JCC chairman, a retired state Supreme Court justice named Everett Price, a man known for his profound, almost mournful solemnity, put on his reading glasses. He did not look at her. He read from the document in his hands. This commission has investigated the events, as well as the comprehensive judicial record of Judge Eleanor Hayes. Justice under review. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss our latest stories. His voice was a deep, resonant bass that filled every corner of the room. We have found a pattern of behavior that is not just alarming, it is shocking. Judge Hayes has wielded his immense power not as a scalpel for justice, but as a hammer of personal, deeply rooted prejudice. He finally looked up, his eyes peering over his glasses, and for the first time he addressed her directly. "Your actions on that day, sir, were not a mistake, as your counsel has argued. They were the predictable, inevitable product of a bias that you have allowed to fester and guide your hand for years. You failed to see a man. You failed to see a lawyer. You failed to uphold your most sacred, fundamental, and simple duty to be impartial. You saw only color, and you acted on that prejudice with the full terrifying power of the state." Hayes let out a small, choked sob. Howell put a hand on her back, but it was a useless gesture. "Therefore," the chairman continued, "it is the unanimous decision of this commission, based on the overwhelming weight of the evidence and the testimony of Dr. Patel, Miss Thompson, Mr. Gibbons, and Mr. Brooks, that Judge Eleanor Hayes be permanently removed from the bench of the Brooklyn County Superior Court, effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. Permanent removal, the end of everything. But the chairman wasn't finished. Furthermore, he is hereby barred from holding any judicial or state-appointed office for life. His name will be stricken from the bar of this state. Another blow. He couldn't even practice law. And finally, he said, his voice dropping, as per the state's judicial malfeasance clause, which is invoked in cases of gross negligence and willful misconduct, all state-funded pension and retirement benefits are forfeited. This was the end. It was a professional death sentence, a financial execution, a total and complete nullification of his entire life. Hayes's legs buckled. He didn't just cry, he collapsed, slumping against Preston Howell, who had to physically hold him up. The sound he made was a raw animal wail of despair. The hard karma was absolute. He lost his title, he lost his power, he lost his reputation, he lost his future. The Hayes name, once a source of judicial royalty in the county, was now a permanent stain, a synonym for disgrace, a footnote in law school textbooks on how not to be a judge. The merciless of Courtroom 3B had been, in the end, mauled by the very system he thought he owned. Courtroom 3B was a different world. It was no longer a kingdom of cold shadows. It was just a room. The first thing Nathan Brooks had requested upon taking office, a request Judge Hoffman had gleefully signed off on, was the removal of the heavy, moth-eaten velvet curtains that had suffocated the windows for decades. Now, bright, unfiltered light flooded the space, revealing dust motes dancing in the air and the scuffs on the floor that Hayes's perpetual twilight had once concealed. The room felt different. The oppressive metallic tang of fear was gone, replaced by a nervous, chaotic energy. The high, intimidating bench sat empty, a relic. The new presiding judge for this department, a sharp, energetic woman named Judge Pina, had opted to use a simple lower desk set up on the main floor closer to the counsel tables. The room was being used for arrangements, and the atmosphere was almost conversational. Public defenders who used to stand rigid with dread now argued motions with vigor. Young assistant district attorneys hired by Nathan's new administration were present, their binders filled with new directives on bail reform and diversion programs. The old guard ADAs, the ones who had thrived under Hayes' tough-on-crime regime, looked visibly uncomfortable, like men forced to wear ill-fitting suits. But the most profound change was not in any single courtroom. It was happening in the Chief Prosecutor's office, and it was about to radiate through the entire building. Nathan Brooks stood at a podium in the courthouse press room. The room was packed, a sea of cameras and microphones. In the front row, Ben Carter, the reporter who had broken the story, held his pen at the ready. In the back, standing against the wall, was Rebecca Thompson. She wasn't here by accident. Nathan had personally invited her. Nathan's suit was immaculate. His tie was perfect. His face, however, was not one of triumph. It was the face of a man about to begin a marathon. His voice was steady as he addressed the room. "Good morning," he began. Not long ago, on my first day in this building, I had an illustrative experience. I was not here as a prosecutor, I was here as a defendant, and I witnessed from that unique vantage point a complete and total breakdown of justice. A low murmur rippled through the press corps. "It was a personal experience," he continued, "but I have learned that it was not a unique one. For far too long, justice in Brooklyn County has been a matter of luck. It has depended on the mood of a judge, the color of your skin, the quality of your suit, or the name on your ID badge. It cannot depend on whether the defendant happens to be the new DA. Justice must be a guarantee." He paused, letting the words sink in. He looked directly into the main camera, his gaze unblinking. My predecessor's office was, by all accounts, focused on one thing: convictions. High conviction rates, tough sentences. That is a simple and ultimately a hollow metric for success. It says nothing of fairness. It says nothing of righteousness. It says nothing of justice. An office that pursues victory at the expense of justice is not a prosecutor's office. It is an instrument of oppression. He gestured to a newly printed sign behind him. That is why today I am formally announcing the formation of the Brooklyn County Conviction Integrity Unit. A shockwave, palpable and audible, went through the room. This wasn't just a new policy. This was a revolution. Reporters were already texting their editors. A Conviction Integrity Unit, CIU, was a declaration of war on the old way of doing things. It was an admission that the system had been wrong. "The CIU," Nathan said, his voice rising in command. "Justice under review. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss our latest stories. Will be an independent division within this office. Its sole purpose will be to investigate and remedy past wrongful convictions and instances of clear systemic injustice. And its first task, its first order of business, will be a comprehensive, top-to-bottom review of every felony conviction and every summary contempt ruling issued by former Judge Eleanor Hayes for years." The room erupted, shouted questions, the flash of cameras, the scrambling of feet. This was it. This was the karma. It wasn't just that Hayes was gone. He was digging up the roots of his entire toxic legacy. Nathan held up a hand. "I will take questions in a moment, but let me be clear. This is not a witch hunt. This is a search for facts. This is about finding every person who was sentenced not on evidence but on bias. It's about finding every people versus Rodriguez, a case you'll soon learn about where a young person was jailed for time for a first offense, while a white student on the same day had his case dismissed for the same crime." He then looked to the back of the room, finding Rebecca Thompson in the crowd. "And we will not be doing this alone. This review will be conducted in full partnership with the Brooklyn County Public Defender's Office." He nodded to Rebecca. "Miss Thompson, who so courageously stood for her client, has agreed to co-chair the review panel. This office will no longer view the public defenders as adversaries, but as partners in the pursuit of a just outcome." Rebecca Thompson, stunned, could only nod, a small, weary, but profoundly grateful smile on her face. Ben Carter looked from Nathan to Rebecca and back, scribbling furiously. He understood. This wasn't just a press conference. It was the signing of a new constitution for Brooklyn County. The hard karma, Ben realized, wasn't just the removal. It wasn't the lost pension. It wasn't the humiliation. This was the hard karma. It was the methodical, public, and righteous erasure of his entire career. It was the unwinding of his every cruel decision. It was the ultimate pronouncement that his entire career had been a failure, a stain to be scrubbed clean. The courtroom of Judge Eleanor Hayes was her empire. She was judge, jury, and often executioner, especially for those she deemed unworthy. When Nathan Brooks, a black man in a slightly rumpled suit, stood before her for a simple traffic warrant, she saw only what her prejudice allowed, another criminal. She decided to make an example of him. She refused to listen. She sentenced him to time in jail for contempt. But what Judge Hayes didn't know was that the man she was trying to imprison was not just an innocent citizen. He was the most powerful lawyer in the city and her new boss. Courtroom 3B of the Brooklyn County Courthouse was not just a room. It was a monument to Judge Eleanor Hayes. The oak walls, darkened by a century of grim pronouncements, were scrubbed and polished weekly. The brass railing separating the gallery from the bar gleamed under the cold fluorescent lights. Even the air felt curated, heavy with the scent of old paper, floor wax, and the metallic tang of absolute, unquestionable authority. And at the center of this universe, perched high on her judicial throne, sat Judge Hayes. In her late 60s, Hayes was a woman forged from old money and brittle ideology. Her silver hair was perpetually locked in a severe bun, and her robes, always impeccably starched, seemed more like armor than attire. In the courthouse hallways, she was known as Eleanor the Merciless, a nickname spoken only in whispers. She believed in order, in breeding, and in the cleansing power of swift, merciless judgment. Her grandfather, Judge Theodore Hayes, had presided over this same bench, and Eleanor saw herself as the righteous heir to a legacy of stamping out the element that she believed was perpetually eroding society. Her morning docket was, in her eyes, a parade of human failings. Drunk drivers, petty thieves, sobbing mothers, and defiant young men. She viewed them all with the same icy disdain. "Next case," she droned, not looking up from her papers. Docket number, the People versus Brooks, her bailiff, a burly, long-suffering man named Frank Gibbons, announced. "Counsel," Hayes's voice snapped like a whip. A young woman with tired eyes and a polyester suit stood up. "Rebecca Thompson, Your Honor, from the Public Defender's Office. My client is here on a bench warrant for a failure to appear on a traffic violation." A failure to appear. Wonderful. Hayes finally looked up, her gaze scanning the courtroom. "Well, where is he? Don't tell me he's failed to appear for his failure to appear. The audacity is almost impressive." "He is here, Your Honor. He was detained at the security checkpoint," Thompson said, her voice tight. Detained at security figures. The side door opened, and Deputy Gibbons led a man to the defendant's table. He was a tall black man, athletic in build. He wore a dark gray suit, expensive but disheveled, as if he had been sleeping in it. His tie was loosened at the collar, He looked focused, his expression a mask of controlled frustration. This was Nathan Brooks. Judge Hayes stared at him. She didn't just look, she inspected. Her eyes took in his dark skin, his short, neat dreadlocks, his rumpled suit. Her lip curled, an almost microscopic movement, but one that Rebecca Thompson, Frank Gibbons, and everyone in the gallery recognized instantly. It was the look, the "here we go" look. Hayes's internal monologue began, a venomous whisper that fueled her judicial persona. Look at this, the arrogant strutting in here in a fancy suit he probably bought with stolen money, thinking he's above the law. He can't in the cold, echoing halls of Brookfield County District Court. Judge Harold Benson sat high on his bench like an untouchable king. His black robe was meant to symbolize justice, but for him it became a shield for deep-seated prejudice and unchecked power. That morning, his cold eyes fixed on Jamal Harris, a quiet black man in an orange jumpsuit, charged with possession of fentanyl. Benson mocked him openly, sneering at his type, dismissing his public defender's pleas, and forcing a guilty plea with threats of maximum time. "Rules aren't for people like you," the judge snarled, his words dripping with racial contempt. He smirked, convinced he had just put another thug away and cleared his docket for more important matters. Justice under review. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss our latest stories. But Jamal Harris was no ordinary defendant. He was Special Agent Kevin Grant of the FBI's Public Corruption Task Force, deep undercover in Operation Gavel Down. He had come to witness firsthand the systemic bias and cruelty rotting Judge Benson's courtroom, the same courtroom that handed out harsher sentences to people of color, buried complaints, and turned justice into a weapon for the powerful. Every insult, every biased threat, every display of raw arrogance had been recorded on a hidden wire. When the moment came, Jamal stood tall, shed the defeated posture, and spoke with commanding clarity. "Your Honor, my name is not Jamal Harris. I am Special Agent Kevin Grant of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The courtroom froze. Judge Benson's smug face drained of color as the man he had just sentenced revealed himself as the federal agent who had been gathering evidence against him. What followed was swift and devastating. Federal agents stormed the courtroom. Benson was arrested on the spot for bribery, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and deprivation of rights under color of law. His empire of hate and unchecked power collapsed under the weight of the very justice he had twisted for so long. This powerful story delivers one of life's most profound and deeply emotional lessons. Asterisk, asterisk. Never let prejudice or power blind you to the worth of another human being, because the person you mock, belittle, or try to destroy today may be the very one who holds the authority and courage to bring your entire world of injustice crashing down. Asterisk. Asterisk. Judge Benson saw only skin color and assumed weakness. He never imagined the quiet man before him carried the badge and the moral strength to expose decades of systemic cruelty. The tale reminds us that true justice is patient but relentless. It often arrives in plain clothes with quiet dignity, waiting for the perfect moment to rise. Life will sometimes place you in a courtroom of its own where you are judged unfairly, dismissed because of how you look, or treated as less than. In those crushing moments, remember Agent Kevin Grant. Hold your head high, speak your truth with calm resolve, and trust that the universe has a way of balancing the scales with breathtaking precision. No one is truly above the law, and no one is truly beneath its protection. Respect is not a favor. It is the foundation of a just society. The tables can turn when we least expect it, and karma has a way of arriving wearing the very robe we thought made us untouchable. If this heartfelt story of hidden strength, systemic bias, and the quiet power of truth moved you deeply, if it reminded you never to judge too quickly, or stay silent when dignity is attacked. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been dismissed or witnessed prejudice that later led to a powerful reckoning? Your story could give hope to someone feeling powerless right now. If you love emotional, inspiring life lessons wrapped in gripping tales of courage and accountability, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful chapter. Let's build a community that values respect, fairness, and human dignity for every single person. Thank you for watching. Your support means everything. See you in the next inspiring story. Justice Under Review. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to make sure you never miss our latest stories.